Hello, everybody. We're running a little late on time, but I'm going to give you a very quick rundown on what my observations were this afternoon. And what a wonderful day to be here to hear so many different folks that have different perspectives. But then as you boil it down, the messages I see it are fairly consistent across the board. As I look at Mr. Butler and Tom's bottom line is the importance of transparency. And in my mind, the old Ronald Reagan trust but verify brings back verification. And if we look at verification, what tools do we use in technology to assure that we're able to do that? Points that Tom made with respect to using drones, for example, to verify and document environmental impacts as you're on BLM or Forest Service ground or what have you. And that brings back into play with what Dr. Acevedo said in terms of connectivity. So the challenge as I see it is weaving together the existing technology, and certainly Ray pointed that out in terms of making sure that everybody is on the same page and making such information scalable and very easy for use. Now, I've been part of the system here for quite a while, and I look back to the day where we had bag phones and what we have at our fingertips today. And I can tell you that when Dr. Field and I were in grad school together 35 years ago, the computing power that we have today in our cell phones is probably equal to everything Bruce Golden had upstairs in that room that he used. And it just blows me away. And as I look in my crystal ball, looking down the road, I see improvements in battery technology. We're seeing improvements with 5G in terms of telecommunications. We're seeing form structure issues. As I bring back together with what Megan talked about, that really went over my head, I got to be honest with you. Looking at it from the biotech perspective and coming back with what John was talking about with antibiotic resistance, many companies have sprung to action, if you look at that, in terms of some of the immunological products that have come to bear, being Zelnate, and there's also a product as well taken from a different angle from the Elanco company. So we're seeing that. And so what I challenge you to do, and certainly as Dr. Sparrow would say that technology is value neutral, and we need to figure out how we can make it work. And if you go to the next slide here, this is diffusion of technology. Actually, you pointed it out, but it was inverted. This professor here was born in Carroll, Iowa, back in the early 30s, and was actually a professor at the University of New Mexico. And he come up with basically a diffusion of technology in terms of how people react to new technology and by which way they accept the technology. If anything, and as a professor, I challenge you to go home, Google this guy, Google this diffusion of innovation to maybe help you better understand as you go back to the farm and you're dealing with what did you call it, ornery old bastard? And try to get into people's heads and reasons why they may be not receptive to new adoption of technology. My middle brother managed a farm credit office out of Burlington, Colorado for several years, and he's since moved up to the head shed in Colorado Springs. But he also remarked, he remarked this to me a couple years ago, his reaction to some of those larger farmers in northeastern Colorado sending their young people off to college, and before they came back to the home place, they would go work somewhere else. And his analogy to that was those existing operations were sending their young people off to be educated, and they were coming back, and it was like putting a fresh coat of paint on the barn. They were bringing back new ideas, new perspectives, and everything. And so with no further ado, I welcome this afternoon's speakers up because we are running late, and much more interesting to hear from them and your questions as well.
Okay.
Okay, so questions. We'll start for the panel.
Question for John. Do you sell your cattle on a grid? And since they're commodity cattle, how well do you hit that grid? And does that information go back to your producers?
Yes, yes, we do sell. We have a dual pricing structure in our organization, so we can sell the cattle on the cash market or our grid, the grid that we built, and so we do get paid for value, and really, at the end of the day, 95% of our cattle go on the grid, because that's what we're about. We're trying to extract as much as we can, and if we don't, the cattle don't perform, we get penalized. That's okay, but if they do perform, there's a reward for that. So your second question was, oh, the information go back? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, right. So I may be a bit of a bad guy here when I answer this question. If we are partners on the cattle, the information is shared. If we have a long-time relationship on where the source of the cattle came from, the information is shared. But when we own the cattle, we look at it as that information is ours. And this is where it's a true story. When we were feeding, we used to feed a lot of natural cattle, and we got this set of cattle that came in, and we gave all the information back. It was great, and it worked out great for the ranchers and for us too, because we were trying to learn. Well, we had this one set of cattle that were. Is anybody here from Montana? I'm not picking on Montana. They came from Montana. Great cattle, great. I mean, big, black, ready to go kind of cattle, and they performed a house of fire. And so we gave the data back, and then the next year, our hope was that we would get the cattle again. You know, that was our objective. Well, then the cattle show up on the superior sale, and sure enough, the data is there, and it says BMG data. So the cattle went way higher than I could afford, and we felt like that was a little bit of not the intention or the spirit of the relationship that we had thought we had this budding relationship. So from then on, we felt like, okay, if the cattle are that good and you want a 10% ownership in them, whatever, just a little bit of a partnership. And in most cases, if we know the producer, we'll share the information, but we're just not going to blanket give the information back, because we've had our nose bloodied a little bit once or twice. So that's how I'd answer that question.
Next question, anybody?
This question's for John. Hey, John, I was just wondering, when you started working on the back end, working with the consumers, what was the biggest enlightenment that you had on that helped perform your business? The other thing I'll say too is, like, I wish the beef industry would take a little more advantage of certain diets, like right now, the keto diet and some of those other things that are high caveman type eating. I think that's a huge thing that we should be trying to grab at this point in time.
My wife thinks I'm a caveman many times, so I'm probably in that category. But in terms of our biggest enlightenment or our biggest aha as we got really involved with the end user was really how appreciative they were of what we do on our side of the business. It's almost like going to the zoo, seemed like. You know, because we show up and we have a cowboy hat on, and we talk about cattle, and we talk about horses, and we talk about the people that are involved in caring for the cattle, and it's just an amazing receptivity That was my biggest. I thought we would have a lot of conflict. I expected that, and didn't receive that at all. It was just the opposite. So I guess that would be my response, is that it was just so positive that once we open up and once the transparency is there, there's a huge appreciation for what you all do, and we just don't tap into it just because we don't have that, that connectivity as much.
What percentage of the cattle that you feed are agent source verified, industry-wide agent source verified, and how do you get these dirty old crusty bastards to accept traceability? Any suggestions there from anybody?
Yeah, those are big questions, and I'm going to ask Tom to help me answer this one a little bit. So I'll touch, because on the source and age, I can answer that one germane to our company. There was a time 3 years ago that 35% of our cattle were source and age verified, and then the premium went away. What happened was the packers were able to validate age through dentition and ossification of the carcasses, so there was no longer a need for the source and age back to the ranch. So then the economic incentive to maintain that information went away. And we're in business to stay in business. If it goes away, if I don't have a premium for you as a rancher to do it, what's the reason? What's the purpose? What's the point? So that answers that question. I think it's a shame, though, because I'm such a strong believer in traceability on so many levels. But that we had a chance to really get there. And if you look at traceability from a global standpoint, every major producing beef country in the world has a full traceability system, except the United States of America. It's crazy. So when you look at our opportunity to have access to these markets, and Australia has a full traceability program, and Brazil has one, and Canada has one, what do you think those boys are doing? They're going in there and say, buy my beef. Not only is it good beef, but I got traceability, and those fellas with red, white, and blue don't have one. So it's being used against us. I would probably do the same thing. But geez, come on. So anyway, that is one of the big difficultnesses that we've got with traceability. Now, the reason we don't have traceability, I would tell you, is that we have the fear of black helicopters. Maybe that term has been used already today. So we have many that feel like, gosh, I don't want to be connected to a database, and I don't want to have my thing go through there, but somebody's going to be able to come on my place and be able to tell what I got. Well, I'm telling you, by 2030, we're going to have to get over that. If we're afraid about that, we probably ought to get out of the business, because we're really going to be required to be professional cattlemen and women, not passive, to gain that trust of the consumer that I've talked about. So anyway, too much of an answer for your question, but I'm going to ask Tom to make some comments on traceability as well.
Well, we source and age at our place because two reasons. One, it keeps the door open as market opportunities evolve. Secondly, we found out we got a lot better at processing cattle when we had to slow down to put that tag in. And the vaccine went in them instead of on them. And our vet told us that was a really good move. We got better at handling cattle. We did everything better at weaning because we were slowing down to put that tag in. And John, when we said whether we get paid for that directly today, I don't really care, because I know that I'm going to get paid for it because the same guy keeps buying our cattle, right? Because we're doing a better job for them. How do you get people to buy in? Look, I'm a voluntary thinker. Like I hate mandatory moves. But markets move, and when they move without sensitivity. Like there won't be, when it moves, John, there won't be a, geez, we're sorry. No, it'll just move. And so we want to be ready for that. As a family, we've bought into, we do three things. We ask three questions every time we make a decision on the ranch. Number one, do we want this to be part of the story? And we take our family heritage really, really seriously, and so do we want this to be part of the story? So that keeps us from doing a lot of really dumb things. Second thing we ask is, will this affect the eating quality of the final product? And we ask that question every time we make a decision. That's why we're very, very careful about a lot of things. And the third thing we ask ourselves is, does this change the integrity of our business? When we look at each other, are we okay as a family? Because I'm in this with, and our manager is with us as well. I mean, course of 12 months, we buried my father and buried his son. And he and I have a relationship based on that it's all about integrity. So I think, if we want to wear the white hat, we want to claim a free enterprise, we want to claim American pride, then let's own them, and let's own everything about them. And for us, we're gonna stand up and be counted. They're our cattle, and if we messed it up, we want to know about it so we can fix it.
So along those same lines, Dr. Field and John, and so is this just the cost of doing business for producers today, or in 5 years, or are consumers willing to pay for this? And then maybe for the technology guys, where does blockchain fit into this whole animal ID traceability discussion, or does it?
Good question. I think we make one big mistake with consumers. We act like the consumer is this defined, homogeneous subset, right? Like people are like there's one market. I think there is going to be a cost to doing business in this at some level, but I think what it does, it gives us a chance to figure out which supply chains we want to align with. And I think the supply chains are going to, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's going to be an alignment. And I think you're going to be able to pick your team, and we want to be able to pick the teams we want to be on. And we know that that's part of the fee of getting into that supply chain, because we want to be part of a high quality system. We don't want to be a commodity producer. And then part of it is I'm a big believer that if you can grow trust, just imagine if we could grow enough trust and get enough access that every Chinese citizen ate 1/10 of a pound more of beef. What does that do for the opportunities for my kids? It changes their business model overnight. So for me, that's, I mean, and I'm a little bit of a Pollyanna, right? I mean, I'm a good Irishman. I will cry in my beer, so we make emotional choices, but that's one that I think we're willing to make. But I'd love to hear what these guys think about blockchain, because I think it's a really interesting opportunity. It could go south. It can be done badly, but I think it can be done really well.
I think you would be more the expert, or Dr. Azevedo, to talk about blockchain technology. I'm just thinking if we can tie up the information from the animal all the way through and help on the traceability. I'm just thinking about milk, right? I'm going to track where the milk's coming from and the health of that baby calf and everything, and just slap all that information together and just pass it along to the consumer. So that's how I view it. Let's see what the other guys have to say here.
I guess I get to throw 2 cents in there, I guess. You know, blockchain has been a popular buzz term that goes right along with IoT, and IoT was an enabler of blockchain. So if we want to be able to trace everything that's happened with every pound of beef from the start of, feeding them and all the way to the plate, that takes sensor technologies being involved in every step. Now, you start thinking about RFID tags being able to track cattle, that was nice, but where was the hiccup? You got to go over there and scan it, right? And so that's an extra step that you have to do. What's really going to enable blockchain to truly happen is that there's going to be sensors on the cattle, in the cattle, to where basically the rancher, the feedlot, whoever, doesn't have to do extra effort for tracing that cow moving from place to place, what they're feeding. Everything is basically going to get synced together automatically. And so from doing that, making it easier to collect that data will enable them to have a full blockchain set up. But in order to do that, we have to have the IoT system in place. And I'd have to say right now, that's what's down the road of probably being, you know, all the way from 2 to 5 years out. Because we have the sensors now to do that, but where we really have gaps is in the connectivity, dealing with, like, saying, who here has been somewhere in Kansas and I don't have cell signal, you know? I live in Manhattan on top of the hill and I don't got no damn signal. Verizon, what's up? You know, kind of a thing. And so that whole problem creates gaps in the system, and there's multiple avenues being explored to try to take care of it. Obviously, your cellular networks are trying to expand their network, but the other groups are trying to do what's called edge computing, where they collect the sensor data locally, and then when they get in Wi-Fi range, then they sync it. But then you don't have real-time data. And so if you start thinking about from a response time problem, then that creates issues. So, John, you got anything on blockchain?
I got nothing on blockchain. But
John has nothing for once.
Excuse me. I have a question. As we think about technology, alignment, integration, and we start to think about, from the business perspective, valuing the product that we have to provide to the consumer, do we start to think about new avenues for risk management, how we determine value? Are we going to be seeing changes in the way that we think about how we use the CME, how we come to determine weekly, monthly, annual valuations? And I'd appreciate anyone's thoughts on that area.
So a couple of things. One, in this whole valuation, we, in a perfect world, okay, and I know it's not a perfect world, but in a perfect world, we'd value cattle one time, and that'd be at the end, right? Because my calves, what are they really worth to the beef industry as weaned calves? They're not worth, I mean, they have value because they're an input, but does a consumer want a weaned calf? No. No, they do not. Right? And I know this is weird thinking, but when we think about it, we've been thinking about this as an organization, is can we figure out a way to align with somebody where we determine the value, as opposed to multiple times we create a shared value at the end that we all share in the value that was created. Can we do that? And technology helps us maybe pull that off. Is that going to happen tomorrow? No, but it may happen in the future. Risk management wise, the thing that I'm most excited about relative to the technology space is that machine learning may help us as ranchers remember what we automatically forget. Because I can tell you, as a family, when it's good, we remember it. And if it's bad, as soon as we can forget it, we do. Right? And John, you probably have heard this saying before, but like the hardest thing in the world to do is to sell a good idea to a cattleman that's making money. Right? So we think machine learning's got some potential. On an operational standpoint, we want to be reminded that if we get 17 straight days of below 20-degree weather, the heifers need to leave the ranch. They've got to be gone on day 18, or we're in trouble because we'll never get them pregnant. And we've actually historically been able to pull that data together. But we'd like to have machine learning that makes us smarter and faster in that space. That's the kind of risk we'd like to manage against, because that's our environmental and risk is way worse. And then we'd like to be able to measure risk on things like access to transportation, access to management, access to labor. John will have a more sophisticated.
Well, I can give you. I'm going to give you an example of a model that we participated in that sort of describes what Tom outlined. We tried a project. It was called Ranchers Renaissance, and we had, from a valuation standpoint, we said, okay, let's take and value everything at the end. And so we put a steady price on feeder cattle because we had to have cash flow for the rancher. So let's say it's $1. And fine, so we pay all of us pooled our dollars together, and we said we're going to pay you $1 at the time. They come to the feed yard, we're going to put $500-600 of feed in them, we're going to give you $500, so your cash flow is right. Then we take them apart, we get the packer, we got a brand on this product, so now it's valued. We put that animal back together in a carcass calculator, and we got the end value. And then we said, okay, let's share that back. Wonderful theory, idea. Now, this was 15 years ago, so maybe it could be done now. But what happened was, when we started the program, the feeder calf price was 60 cents, the market price. And the ranches were losing money. So they were all about participating, because we're going to say, hey, based on your cost, you should get $1. So we did. So they loved it. It's wonderful. Bueno, good. And then what he's doing is he's basically taking the margin from the packing plant to share. But that's okay. That's great in the real world. If you could be king for a day. Okay. Then what happened? 3 years into the program, feeder cattle became worth $1.30, and I'm still going to value that calf at $1. What's fair is fair. The rancher could not withstand the pressure of the market to stay. It was fine when he was making money, relative to his neighbor in the marketplace. But when the worm turned, he couldn't stand the pressure of the market. Now, the feeder could stand the pressure because we deal with lots of money all the time. The packer could too, because it was and I'm not pointing fingers at the rancher, but if we got to figure out a way that rancher, just like that pork producer, can be committed all the way to the end all the time. It doesn't answer your question specifically. I'm just giving you an example of a model. Now, what we do in our company, we are very risk averse. And so we use contracts, and we do everything we can to mitigate risk. And they're very important to us. And the grid is very important to establishing value. Is that going to withstand the test of time when our cash market is now less than 20% of the cattle marketed? I don't know. It seems questionable. So we're going to have to figure it out. We think about it a lot. We operate in the day-to-day, and we seem to be surviving in the tools that we've got. It's probably not long-term sustainable, just the way that cattle are trading today.
Any other final questions? Here you go, Luis.
So I'm seeing a lot of beef semen being put in dairy cows, and a lot of large dairy operations getting really good results, so they can manage to create a lot of these crossbred calves. Do both of you see this a reality in the future, and more integration and basically filling up that gap of not having that? There's a lot of variability on the calves that you get, and now we on the dairy side of things, because we are just so consistent on the cattle, and then we can provide that type of product that you would like to see. So that's my question for both of you.
Why don't you start?
So he's asking that question, and we are very engaged in that conversation right now. We used to feed we fed as many as 20% of our feeder cattle were black and whites, and our packer partner didn't want any more of them. And he gave us a year and a half to say, look, wean those out of your system, because it wasn't automatic. But part of the issue was that in the cow cycle, right? We didn't have enough feeder cattle. We didn't have enough native cattle to fill the chain. So the co-product from the dairies become very attractive, right? So we get 20-30% of those in our feed yards. Well, now we've got a lot of native cattle available, just because the way the cycle goes, and so now the dairy cattle are less attractive because the dairy influence cattle. But the solution maybe is to take these hybrid cattle and get the best of both worlds. And I will tell you, we're looking at it. The key is consistency. We got to be able to have a consistent product that we could deliver, and one that doesn't create problems for the packer. Because one of the issues with the pure black and white cattle is they're big, they're long, and they create food safety issues at the plant. But these crossbreds are maybe a little bit different. So we're looking at it, and I think there's a lot of promise there.
It's a great opportunity to integrate technologies, right? From sex semen to really, a place where maybe 15 bulls makes sense is like the 15 boars. The dairy industry is a place where maybe there's the five perfect beef sires that really make that fit. And if nothing else, the value is that the dairy industry is finding a way to add value to calves. And every time the dairy industry does better and gets a better record on their perception around animal well-being and animal welfare, that's good for us, because as far as the consumer cares, they could care less whether it's a dairy calf or a beef calf. They don't know the difference, and they assume animal well-being is the same on a dairy as it is in a feed yard, as it is on a cow-calf operation, as it is anywhere. So anything that brings us closer together to create a better image and a better product is, in my opinion, good for the total business.
I'm a rancher here in central Kansas. We retain ownership of our calves. We know they hit very well, they kill very well. We happen to feed in Nebraska, but they do very well. I only can sell that calf one time, unless I'm willing to speculate on the market on the CME and sell him multiple times. How do I lock in a piece of the grid that I'm receiving on my cattle? And in particular, I've seen this choice select spread move a tremendous amount depending on what the packer is getting in the front door. How can I use part of that to manage my risk? And I'm doing what you guys are telling me to do, but I can't lay off any more risk than the commodity calf.
Really good question. That's a great question. Everybody hear that? I mean, how? And it's. I think that's the next evolution of where we're going to go. And I understand the realities of seasonality. I understand the realities of commodity pricing. We have to figure out how to move past that in the supply chain. And John can probably speak this better than I can, but I happen to believe that CEOs are of publicly traded companies are far more worried about things than most consumers, because they have to deal with quarterlies and they've got to deal with activist investors. And the activist investor can make your life hell if you're a CEO. And because by law you're tied to that quarterly report, you've got this pressure, right? And so one way for them to relieve that pressure is to create a pricing system that actually allows us to contract in and lock in the value on the premiums without the move, because it's that seasonality and that variability that makes it. I mean, it's still a crapshoot out there. Even if you're managing your risk, you're still. I mean, we sold cattle on Superior 3 minutes after Trump had one of his episodes. Right, cost us $10,000. Right?
My real issue is the way the choice select spread moves. I've got good, we're hitting 90% choice or better. Hitting fine, but I can't lock into that in.
And it's
It might be $30 because there's not any choice cattle walking in the front, and by the time I get to sell my cattle, it's $8.
Is Don Stiller from Rabobank? Is he still Rabobank Finance? So will the kits and all of the online, et cetera, will that begin to even out the trade? We're going to merchandise beef differently to the consumer, so will that pull some of that seasonality, and the featuring out of the game when we go to more of an online kit style merchandising of beef?
Simple answer, I believe that it will. For years when I was doing the feed yard consulting thing, every year I would try to get my clients to feed for the spread, and I never had any real success in getting them to do it, for the very reason that the day they had the steer ready, everybody else has the steer ready, and the spread's gone. So that's the real kicker there. You're trying to force them into placing a set of cattle against a natural marketing window, and that's a complication. While I'm here, I've got a question for John and his reflection back on the Rancher's Renaissance. Is there enough room, or is there a way to pay the cow-calf guy a market value and still have the shared value perspective, but have no downside risk for the cow-calf guy, but a potential upside?
Maybe. We created what we called a Caf Value Table, and CattleFax helped us put this together. And essentially, we took 10 years of data, and the data said, okay, this is what a 6.5 weight steer should be worth at this time of year. Then we put on top of that a market factor, which was a 4-week rolling average. So we kind of got some sensitivity in there, and I don't know where enough is enough, to answer your question. I don't know. In my example, I said $100 or $1. I don't know if it should be 115 or if it should be 95. I can just tell you that we tried to be sensitive to your question, and it still didn't work. It just, the ranchers that were involved in it, it worked for, but only if they were really, really heavily capitalized. They had a lot of money. So it didn't matter, because they didn't care. They kept their eye on the prize. And they didn't have the bank giving them a call, or they didn't have that. You know what I'm saying? So, but there's only a few of them. You can't make a ratable, relevant supply based on that, and that's what a brand needs. So you have conflicting wishes in that model. Does that help answer your question?
Any more questions? I guess no. Bob, I'll turn it over to you.